I'm with my friend Annette. Annette is a wife to David and a mom of 6. And 4 of those are adult children,
Right.
2 still at home,
Yeah.
right? And how many grandkids now?
4.
4, okay. So Annette, I mostly want to ask you about your time abroad.
Okay.
Because you spent a number of years, I think you said
About 7 total years.
7 years,
Yeah.
okay. So first, can you just list off the places that you have lived with your family?
Yeah, and I want to say, I was thinking about this, I know a lot of people who've like raised their children like their whole lives
Sure.
abroad, and our time was relatively short, just a few years, but it was really important to our family's culture.
Absolutely.
But I have great respect for the women who like do it differently, and I'm not trying to set myself up as an expert on
yes.
that. But yeah, so we lived in Bosnia, in Romania, in the Netherlands, in Sudan, and then we went back to the Netherlands, and then a few years later we went back to Bosnia for a year.
Okay, that's
Yeah.
incredible. So I know when you first went, you started in Bosnia, correct?
Mhm.
So when you first moved to Bosnia, it was supposed to be a 3-month gig.
That's
So,
right.
For a planner like myself,
Uh-huh.
that sounds terrifying. Was that hard for you to adjust your expectations with each move as it continued to get longer and longer? How did you deal with that
Yeah, so
insanity?
if you had told me before we went that we would do that, I would have responded exactly like you, but my husband was in a job in the United States that he was really unhappy in, and there were a lot of issues with the job, and he just needed to get out. So I was all for taking that 3-month job, and we expected him to have gotten another job before we got back. There was a job he'd applied for that he was really well qualified for, and they did not offer it to him. And so it was really panic-inducing in the moment, but then just more things became open, and the longer, actually from the beginning, but the longer we were there, we really enjoyed the way living away from the frenetic pace that we had been living in the United States. We really, really liked that, and so we were happy that it was working out, and so we just decided, well, we'll just go with it, and at that point, it was okay.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay,
So,
cool.
yeah.
So when you first moved to Bosnia, your oldest was 13,
Yes.
and then with each subsequent move, you had multiple teenagers,
Right.
One or multiple.
Uh-huh.
So I would imagine for you to be able to have done it successfully so many times, you really had to have buy-in from your teens especially, but from all of your children. So how did you handle that with your kids? Was that difficult at any point? Were they
Yeah.
resistant to those kind of moves
Mhm.
or on board?
We have very adventurous children, and they were always really good sports. Actually, the hardest move for teenagers was when we moved back to the United States.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the high school culture in the United States is very distinctive and very different from what our kids had before. And we had a daughter who was going into her senior year of high school, and it was a really tough, that was the hardest year, but she was a really good sport about it. But that was the hardest adjustment to make. It made a big difference that we had 4 kids and that they were all close together, because they kind of carried friendships with them, and they actually became much closer because we were living abroad. And so they were always really adventurous and up for it. They were good about tackling the challenge of trying to learn new languages and fit in the place we were. So that was never a huge issue. I think also they really felt the benefit of just how much time we had together as a family, which we hadn't in the U.S.
Cool. That's incredible. You must have really great kids.
I do.
So in each of these moves, and the home experience would have been very different. The living situation would have been very different in each one. Was there a physical item or a family tradition or something that you did to help your kids feel like this is home now, this is home base, to make that a safe place no matter where you were?
Yeah, we didn't have many objects, especially when we first went. We just had what we could take on the airplane. So we didn't have a lot of stuff. But the first few months we were there, I was pretty amazed at how emotionally fine our kids were, because they knew that we didn't know what was happening next, you know, and so there was a lot, but they were just like really, really fine emotionally, and we thought a lot about that and tried to figure out why, and it was patterns. I'm convinced that it was patterns in our family. We're religious, and we always had, in the U.S. we had, and then when we moved abroad, we continued to have family prayer together. We read scriptures together, and then we always had one night a week where we would just like do stuff together as a family. And I think that those structures carried us through. It was like a through line, that there was an emotional consistency, and our kids actually flourished.
You had varying levels of luxuries that we consider in the United States to be necessities a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
And especially, I think, in the Sudan, probably would have been the most primitive area that you stayed in. So I think that my car is a necessity when I drive my kids around.
Uh-huh.
You didn't have a car in the Sudan, and varying levels of that, I would imagine. How has that changed your perspective on what you actually need for your family?
Well, I hate cars, and we didn't have a car until the Netherlands, and we mostly didn't drive it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was happy, and there's really good mass transit in Europe, so we were fine without a car. Yeah, so when we moved abroad, I actually felt like we were living really luxuriously. Part of it was that some economists have looked at how people define their wealth, and it's almost always relative to the people around them.
Okay.
And we were much wealthier, almost embarrassingly wealthier than the people around us in some of the places that we lived. And we always lived in comfortable places. It is true that the Sudan was the hardest. When we lived in Khartoum, we didn't notice when we rented the place that it didn't have any hot water, because I guess I just assumed places would always have hot water. So we only had cold water, but we only had cold water sometimes. So in fact, we had a 2-year-old when we lived there, and he would get up in the morning and go into the bathroom and try the faucet, and if we had water, he would run into our room and he would say, "Good news, we have water." And we couldn't drink the water and stuff like that. So it didn't, and electricity was the other thing that we didn't reliably have electricity. And so it made me realize how much I take for granted about that. But we could get water to drink, and we stored water and stuff. So we were fine, and we lived in a fine living place. It was annoying, but it wasn't like we were in danger, like we didn't have health risks or anything like that. We were just absolutely fine, and you get used to it. I got used to washing my little kids in it wasn't a number 2 tub, but the equivalent, that we pour heat water on the stove and pour it in, and then and you just get used to it. So yeah.
Wow. What do you miss most about traveling?
Not so much about traveling, but living away from. Living away from my home culture. I think it's more general than that, but this was definitely my experience. When you're uprooted and away from your family, which is a sad part, but when you're away from your extended family, away from the institutions that then all of a sudden, you have nothing except your family. And so we ended up having a lot of family time. And even when we moved back to the U.S., that kind of persisted. And so we always had dinner with our whole family every night. That was really standard, even when we were back in the U.S. and our kids were still in high school. But now I have high school students, and we only have, there are 3 nights a week that we can have family or dinner together as a family. And I miss that a lot. I miss the way it forced us to strip away stuff that wasn't really, really important to us. So.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, so this is for my own personal curiosity.
Yeah.
That so I've lived abroad briefly in college. I've traveled some, I really enjoy it. And my husband and I have talked a lot about traveling abroad with our kids and potentially even living abroad. But I will be honest and say I'm not sure I'm cut out for it.
Oh, really?
and I think we could make it work. I think we could do it. But I'm curious whether you think this is, an incredible enough experience for your family that you think everybody should have an experience like this, or you think that a specific amount of people should do this and make it work.
I don't know. I think that's a good question. Why do you think you wouldn't be cut out for it?
I don't know, the idea of doing it with really little kids.
Oh.
And
I think, okay, you've had an experience living abroad. I think traveling with children, if you're going to travel, it is way better to travel with children than without children.
why?
It opened up so many doors to us. If you're interested in going, which I love doing, if you're interested in going to museums or seeing important historical sites, then having kids there, it's a little dicier.
Sure.
But if you're interested in going and experiencing another culture and seeing how people live, then you are in a different category if you're traveling with children, because you're a family and families live everywhere. We were in Egypt for a month. It was just me and my 6 kids while we were waiting for a visa for us to get into Sudan, and David was already there. So we were in Cairo kind of stuck. So we would go out every day and do something in Cairo and then come back to our hotel and wait and see if we got our visa. And I remember, and I enjoyed it very much. And there was a street, he was like a shoe shine guy, like a teenager, maybe 16 years old, who just fell in love with our 2-year-old, I guess he was 3 then, our 3-year-old son, and they were best friends. And every time we went out, we would have to go see Sharif so that, Isaac could talk to Sharif and stuff like that. And we would go other places, and we would go into a restaurant and they would take our babies into the kitchen to show them around. There was just this really welcoming thing. And while we were there, one night I had to go out and get something, pick up bread, or I can't remember what it was, and everyone was back in the hotel, and I said, oh, I'll just go out. And so I went out, and the street was a completely different experience. It was really, people treated me differently, and I was nervous because I was a woman by myself, as night was falling on the streets of Cairo, and I realized, I have experienced a totally different Cairo than I did before. And we had experiences with my husband's work where he was going into countries that had experienced some cataclysm, and the cataclysm was over, and now they were trying to institute new institutions, and so he was setting up new court systems. And so that can be, that is a traumatic thing to say, we're going to, these international people are coming in, and we're going to change your institutions.
Sure.
And so there was resistance. And one of the things he would do is he would come up with opportunities to introduce our children to the people he was working with, and it would change their attitude, because they realized, he's actually living here with his family, and it gave him a credibility, really caring about the long-term good of the country. So anyway, I think if you're going to travel, unless you want to do luxury travel, which is its own wonderful thing, but if you're going to travel to try to get to know a place, you should definitely travel with kids.
Oh, wow. Okay. I've never heard that.
I'm passionate about that.
Before, but that's very cool. Well, thank you very much for doing this. I really appreciate it. It's been fun to pick your brain about this a little bit. Are you ready for a speed round?
I'm ready.
Okay.
I think I have my answers.
Okay, good. Annette, what's your favorite sound?
We have a dinner bell, and I love the sound of the dinner bell because that means everyone's going to be together.
Oh, I love that. What's your least favorite sound?
The telephone ringing. I always have this moment of dread, someone's going to ask me to do something, or something's wrong, or completely without reason, but it's irrational.
That's fair. What's your favorite word?
Hibberty peep. So when we were in the Netherlands, we learned the Dutch happy birthday song, and they sing it, and then at the end, someone calls out "Hibberty peep," which is like "hip hip hooray" or "hip hip." I guess that's the best translation. And then everyone else says "hooray," and I just love it because it's like part of our birthday traditions, and it's funny sounding, and my kids would say it when they were really little.
That's adorable. What do you know?
I know, and I have to remind myself of this, that usually good things happen. I like to think of myself as an optimistic person, but I think I'm actually kind of pessimistic and I catastrophize. And so I've learned to recite to myself, usually good things happen, and that's very true. Usually good things do happen.
That's really beautiful. What do you want to learn? I had several ideas for this one. One thing I want to learn is how to plot a novel. So, cool.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds fun. What scares you?
The thought of my children not being equipped to face the challenges that they're going to face. So hopefully,
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me about a mother who inspires you.
So I've been thinking about, there are many mothers who inspire me, but I've been thinking about one in particular recently. These days I write picture book biographies, and I'm doing a biography that comes out next year about an 8-year-old girl who was a political activist for the Americans with Disabilities Act. And the biography is about her and should be about her. But as I've interviewed her and gotten to know her, I've also gotten to know a little bit about her mom. And she's the name of the girl is Jennifer Keelan, and her mother's name is Cindy Keelan. And she is a remarkable woman. And part of it is that she gave birth to a child with disabilities. So, any parent with a child with disabilities has just a huge amount of work that they have to do. But the thing that really impressed me about her is she followed her daughter's lead as her daughter moved into political activism as a very young child, and it wasn't something that their family had done before, and yet her mom was able to take this interest and this passion that her daughter had. And you think as a parent, well, like I'll make room for my child's passion, and that's part of it, but it also takes like actively doing stuff. And so her mom took all these risks and did all these things that were uncomfortable for her because she saw how important it was for her daughter, and she continues to do that. And I just think that that's such a lovely example of mothering, where you're led by your child, but at the same time that you're being led by your child, you kind of have to lead your child, but in a very thoughtful way that reflects their interests. And I think she just did such a good job of doing that. And I don't know that I've ever been that good at following my children's lead and then creating space for them. And so I really, really admire that. I hope I could be a mom like that.
Wow, that's really cool. I love that idea of leading and being led.
Yeah.
That's a hard balance to strike.
Yeah.
Annette, what are you good at?
I am good at being in a place and figuring out what's great about that place, and it's a learned skill. I learned it mostly from my husband, who I think is naturally good at it. But so when you go a place, you figure out what's wonderful about that, and then you enjoy that instead of missing what's different from other places you've been.
Cool. That's a skill you would have needed to have, I would imagine. All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.